Now, the US President-elect Donald Trump announced that Elon Musk will lead the Department of Government Efficiency, a position that Trump hinted at during his campaign trail. Elon Musk will head the department alongside Indian-American entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy. Trump had made the announcement on his Truth social media platform. And Donald Trump also won the presidential elections last week by a fairly comprehensive margin, defeating Democratic rival Kamala Harris, who's the current vice president, by 69 electoral college votes. Now, during his victory speech, Donald Trump praised Elon Musk and described him as an amazing and super genius guy. He also mentioned that the billionaire spent 2 weeks in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania campaigning with him. Let's take you through the Trump Cabinet 2.0 in some time. And days before the American elections, our group editor-in-chief, Navika Kumar, exclusively spoke to Vivek Ramaswamy, who's now going to lead the Department of Government Efficiency in Trump's Cabinet 2.0, along with Elon Musk. That conversation took place in New York City in September.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Team Trump enters its very, very high-octane lap of presidential elections, I'm joined by one of the most well-known Indian Americans who had a bid at the presidential race himself, Vivek Ramaswamy. Entrepreneur, man who's a Republican, a man who has an Indian identity that he's so proud of. Thank you very much, Vivek Ramaswamy, for joining me.
It's great to be here.
You're also an author.
Yes.
And you wear your Indian identity and your Hindu identity on your sleeves. Is that a little bit away from what Americans really find acceptable?
I don't think it's away from what Americans find acceptable. I do think that political advisors find it unadvisable. I've been advised many times that if I wanted to run for U.S. president as a Hindu, and I'm a practicing Hindu, then that would be a challenge. But, my view is that you got to present to people who you are. You can't be dishonest about who you are and what you stand for. To the contrary, I think people actually reward that authenticity. So in the long run, I think the United States of America is religiously, racially the most tolerant, and I would say one of the most ambitiously inclusive countries in human history. And so I have confidence that the American electorate is going to be very open to people of backgrounds like mine, and I'm grateful for that in this country.
So let me ask you, at the beginning of this interview, we're in the middle of a very high-octane, polarized elections, almost like Indian elections back home, this American elections. And there have been 2 attempts at assassination of the presidential candidate, Donald Trump. How do you see these elections in terms of the campaign, in terms of the shrill conversations, narrative that's taking place?
So I see a big discrepancy because I've traveled this country extensively, obviously, over the last couple of years. There's a discrepancy between the everyday American versus the portrayals in the media. And I think that this country is actually not nearly as divided as the media would have you believe, or social media, or algorithms. Across the country, I would say 80+% of us share the same basic value set in common. Meritocracy, free speech. That's a big one in America, that you get to speak your mind as long as I get to in return. That's a distinctive and quintessentially American commitment that most Americans share in common. The idea that you may not agree on everything, but you still agree on the basic rules of the road. That's what I see in the country, traveling in roomfuls without cameras or social media algorithms. However, the narrative that has been created, and in part it's by the modern internet, in part it's by social media, that preys on division. Advertising dollars are greater when you have somebody click on a story that gives them an emotional anger, that's a quicker response. That amplifies, I think, a division that, at least in most of the country, isn't real. But there is a fringe minority, and the sad part is you brought up 2 assassination attempts in a period of 2 months. We haven't seen that in a generation in America. And so I do think that we are skating on thin ice, but I do think that we can also be stronger on the other side of it. And I hope that those 2 assassination attempts certainly were the worst of what we will see this election cycle. I'm still hopeful that we can unite this country. Frankly, that's why I ran for U.S. president. I do think that it is helpful to come from the outside of politics, especially from a different generation, to reach the next generation in this country who I believe is in some ways lost and hungry for identity. It's not that they're against what conservatives stand for or anything like that. It's that they're hungry to be part of something bigger than themselves.
You talk a lot about algorithms, and that's what you just said, social media algorithms. You know, is that a conspiracy theory, or is that something that is happening across the world? Do you think there was Chinese and Russian interference in the elections in the United States? How do you look at, social media, influencing elections itself, and the rhetoric that we've heard in recent times? And in that rhetoric, with the attempts at assassination of Donald Trump comes, sentences by Joe Biden, who said, let's get Donald Trump in the bullseye. Do you think some of these utterances have led to this very polarized narrative on social media?
I think there's something even deeper going on, which is a mental health crisis, both in this country and in the modern West and the modern world more generally. But what these social media algorithms do is they prey on those insecurities, right? They cause you to click on something more quickly than the other thing if it strikes an insecurity or generally a negative emotion in your heart. And so in some ways it's throwing kerosene on a fire, a mental health epidemic that's already burning, really turning that into a conflagration. So I do think that people who are most vulnerable especially are going to do things they otherwise wouldn't have done in an environment of social media really goading them on. I don't think it's made us more happy as Americans, or I think the same is probably true in India if I had to guess, but certainly in America I don't think it's increased our quality of life. You could say it's increased efficiency, increased effectiveness of reaching mass numbers of people. I have a large social media following myself. I can more easily reach a lot of people, and there's a beautiful side of that. But I think on net, the way these algorithms work have really been preying on our psychological insecurities and frailties, especially in youth. So you got to draw a distinction here, because in adults, there's some things that have positives, some things that have negatives. One of the areas where I draw a distinction is I don't think kids under the age of 16 should be using AI-powered or algorithmically powered social media. When you're a fully formed adult and you're grounded, then you can deal with those risks. Just as we say for tobacco or alcohol or even for unhealthy foods of various kinds. As an adult, you're free to make your own choices. But I think kids aren't the same as adults. In some ways, protecting children in this domain is my core area of focus.
Let me ask you, freedom of speech on the one hand, on the other, statements by people like, let's say, Elon Musk, who owns X, or what was known as Twitter, and he says nobody's even attacking or trying to assassinate Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. Now, is that free speech? Is that conspiratorial? Is it...
So I'm not familiar with the specific statement you cited. I should say Elon has become a good friend over the course of the last couple of years. He's somebody who has created some of the most valuable companies on the planet, because what are companies valuable for? They provide something of great value at a lower cost than it takes for people to be willing to pay for them. I think that's a beautiful thing. He's also somebody who has been an unapologetic defender of free speech in America. Here's my definition of free speech, okay? What counts as free speech, certainly in the American context? A threat is not free speech. Saying something that, engaging in fraud, commercial fraud, is not free speech. But here's what it is. The expression of any opinion is fair game. So there's no such thing as a wrong opinion. There may be a heinous opinion, but the right answer to that kind of bad speech or a heinous opinion is not less speech, it's more speech. And so I consider myself a free speech absolutist. But what does that mean? It means all opinions are fair game. And I think, personally, the path to truth, really, you can even think about this, hopefully will speak to many Indian Americans. It's an important part of the Hindu tradition, right? Satyam. It is grounded in the truth. What is the path to truth? In our civic sphere, in the normal everyday life, it runs through free speech and open debate. I think free speech is a precondition for peace, actually. Because if you tell people they can't speak, that's when they scream. If you tell people they can't scream, that's when they tear things down. And so I think that free speech is not just some liberal arts luxury. It's not some academic, theoretical ideal. It is very practical, both for preservation of peace and for our path to actually understanding what is true. I think we would have understood that COVID was originated in a lab in China much sooner if we had been allowed to say that COVID began in a lab in China. I think we would have reached the answers to a lot of much more difficult questions relating to the fact that many of these COVID policies didn't work, school lockdowns, etc. We would have gotten to the right answer sooner if we had been allowed to debate them. So that's why free speech is such a core value to me.
So you think there is a gap in the narrative of the Republicans in
Well, I
the
think there's always room
alternate-
for, there's many gaps on the Democratic side, but I'm always a believer, even in my own life, in looking myself in the mirror and not resting on my laurels, but asking, how can we be better? How can we aspire to even greater? You know, there's the saying here, it's obviously very popular, and I say I'm enthusiastic supporter of making America great again. But I don't just want to make America great again. I want to make America greater than it has ever been. And I think that's what this country has been founded on, is this idea of the pursuit of excellence, right? We're not perfect. We've never been. As a country, as a party, it doesn't matter. We're human beings. We're fallen human beings after all. But we aspire towards perfection, to a more perfect union. And I think that character of ambition to pursue how we can be better is what defines this country. And I think that's something that it's a message I think people are really hungry for as well.
And what about the statements made by Donald Trump about immigrants, about the fact that immigrants in Springfield were having cats and dogs and their own pets? What does that do for you in terms of the freedom and, people like your parents who came and made a future for themselves and became part of America and the big American dream? How do you stand on that?
Well, look, I think there's a big distinction between illegal immigration into the country, which is really a border security issue, versus the separate policy question of legal immigration in the country. Donald Trump has been a hardliner. Frankly, I have been a hardliner on illegal immigration. I think a nation without borders is literally not a nation. India has an advantage in this regard. Many of its borders are with oceans, but it has land barriers on the north as well, and that's been a difficult issue, but mountainous borders to the north. For reasons that it may not be as present in the Indian context, in the American context, it's a big deal. The southern border is wide open. The northern border, you've actually seen even more illegal crossings. I think it's appropriate for Donald Trump to take a hard position on illegal entry into the United States. We're a nation founded on the rule of law. So I say this as the kid of legal immigrants to this country. That means your first act of entering this country cannot break the law, period. Now, there's a separate question of what type of legal immigrants would add value to America. And I think if you're going to add value to America and do it legally, then I do think that we are a country that has a great tradition of assimilating immigrants from countries around the world to make America stronger and more effective. We're not doing that well today. Right now, our immigration system sadly rewards those who are willing to be dishonest, to lie, to say they're coming for asylum or for refugee status, when in fact those aren't the reasons why they're coming. Instead, I'd like to see an immigration system that rewards those who are going to make the greatest contributions, those who are going to be able to be civic attached to the United States as well, share our national ideals, speak the language. I think those are actually the kinds of immigration policies we need in this country that we are missing today.
You still haven't commented on the cats and dogs.
Well, look, I say this because I prefer substance, right? The media has a field day with this. I don't blame you for this, but the American media has a field day with this where they will pick on one thing that Donald Trump says and make that the issue instead of the actual substance of the issue, which nobody's talking about. And in some ways, it's irresponsible, I think, to focus on one fringe aspect of a discussion while ignoring the actual main plot. If you want to go this direction, you could pick many things that Kamala Harris has said or Joe Biden has said and create a scandal out of that, too. I think we'd rather actually just confront the hard issue itself. What should the immigration policy of the United States be? My view is you can't enter illegally. If you're entering legally, you shouldn't be dependent on government assistance. You should be able to speak the language, English. You should be able to add value to the United States. Those are the criteria we need to use. Are we doing that today? No, we're not. Is there a possibility to change the system so we can? Yes, that possibility exists, and I think that Donald Trump is going to be the more likely candidate to do it.
Were you disappointed when you, went into the presidency race and ultimately didn't quite work out this time? Were you disappointed personally, and are we looking at Vivek Ramaswamy doing this now in 2028?
So was I disappointed? I'm a human being. Of course I was. I set out to accomplish the goal of becoming the next U.S. president, and I didn't achieve that goal. There's a lot of factors I could blame. I could have a very long day of complaining about the media or the political process or the way the Republican Party functioned or the donor class. But one of the things I preach to my kids, and so I got to follow my own advice too, is that the number one factor that determines whether you achieve your goal is actually you. There are other factors that matter, but the number one factor is you. And so this has been a year for deep reflection. I think there are a lot of learnings from the campaign. Frankly, things that if I were to do it again, I would do differently and hopefully for the better. So it's a mixed feeling, because on one hand, at the time that I declared my candidacy for president, my polling was not 0%, it was 0.0%. And most people in this country didn't know my name, let alone could they pronounce it. And by the end of it, I had beaten multiple former and current senators, governors, a former vice president of the United States. I was, the top tier of candidates through the Iowa caucus, made it further than Kamala Harris did when she ran for president as well. And that is beautiful. It's possible in the United States, and I'm proud of our family for doing it together. So part of me is very proud of what we achieved, giving hope to people. I can't walk the streets of New York without taxi drivers, doormen, working class Americans really expressing their appreciation for even the message that we were able to spread. So that part of it I'm deeply proud of. On the other hand, I didn't accomplish the goal. I was in this to really save our country, revive our national identity, not just for the next 4 years, but for the next 400 years, I hope. I hope our longest and best days are still ahead of us. And that mission still guides me. And so whatever I do next, in the next few months, in the next few years, it's going to be to have the biggest possible impact on this country. And, we'll see what the future holds in store.
Let me ask you, have you met with Indian Prime Minister Modi? You've spoken about him a few times. You observe him, and how would you, in Vivek Ramaswamy style, describe him?
Yeah, so I would love to meet him. I haven't met him yet. I've met with a number of other world leaders and prime ministers who have reached out to me during their visits to the United States. But I think the Indian ambassador has been in touch with our team, and I'm sure we'll meet at some point. So I'd welcome that opportunity. And should we visit India at some time in the next couple of years, I'm sure we'll have an occasion to do that. The way I describe him is he's somebody who doesn't apologize for what it means to be an Indian. He's the leader of India. He's a citizen of India. And he doesn't apologize for his pride in his country. And because of that, he gives pride to the other people who he leads. And I think that's an admirable quality. Do I know every one of his policies? Do I agree with 100% of his policies? Probably not 100%, just as I don't agree with 100% of Donald Trump's policies or anybody else. No two people would. But I respect that essential element of being proud of your country without having to apologize for it. I think it's something that India required, getting past its deficit of self-confidence. It's my view in India and how he's been, I think, a leader that, for all of his critics of what they may have to say, is somebody who at least is proud of his nation and will stand for that. My goal is to bring that level of pride and then some, right, to the United States of America at a moment where we lack our own national character here. I don't think it has to stay that way, and that's what I'm on a mission to do.
And do you think the profile of India as a country on the world stage, has it grown and over the past few years, and the reasons that you think are responsible for that?
I think it has grown, and I think the number one reason comes down to economics, GDP growth. India has had impressive GDP growth, led by the opening of markets. India didn't have a track record of that in the 20th century, but in the 21st century, and it continues under Modi, embracing the idea that capitalism is still the best system we have to lift people up from poverty. I don't think that should be a controversial thing to say, though in some corridors it is. But I think that India has demonstrated that better than many countries. And I do think the fact that it is now the world's unambiguously most populous nation, after I think China's poor policy decision to have a one-child policy, I think it creates the opportunity for great productivity. Like any nation, it has its challenges. We have our challenges here in the United States. India has its own challenges too. But I think it is heading in the right direction. And I think, frankly, a stronger relationship with America will also be in India's best interest too. I think it's in the best interest of both countries, but I think it's in India's best interest too. You think about rebuilding the Indian military, you think about further modernizing the economy, further understanding now as a real player. You don't necessarily get treated with kid gloves in negotiations about trade. You're going to now enter the big leagues. That's great. The United States would approach India accordingly, but in the long run, I think that's a good thing.
But if you look at trade, look at US-China trade, look at India-US trade, 1/3 probably of that. How do you change some of these economic decisions? Because it's all very well to say that India and China should do things together, but, there are the realities.
Yeah, look, I think that's there's room for great negotiation there, but I do think it's in the self-interest of both the United States and India vis-a-vis China to say that a stronger U.S.-India relationship is going to leave both the U.S. and India better off. Now, India can't just, free ride on the United States and say, oh, we're a developing nation anymore. We got to look at each other in a serious way and say what's in the self-interest of both countries. And do I think that there's a lot of room for win-wins there? I do. That's the way I look at it.
So just a rapid-fire round. Do you think, your book, Truths, talks about debunking claims that you are some kind of a conspiracy theorist and, your facts about 9/11, coronavirus, and even in D.C. at the Capitol. What do you think
Well, look,
about
I think one of the titles of that chapter is Facts Are Not Conspiracies. They called me a conspiracy theorist when I said COVID began in a lab in China. Turns out it did. They called me a conspiracy theorist when I said that Biden would not be the nominee. At the time I said it, that was a wild idea. Now what do you see? Biden is not the nominee. So I believe in tracking incentives. I'm not always right in my predictions, but I believe following the incentives and following the facts and being bold to speak what others are unwilling to is often part of the path to truth. And that's part of the case I make in this book from my own personal experiences.
And the Capitol incident 4 years ago?
Look, I think the transparency is the way to go. The fact that the government was not initially as fully transparent as it later was, I think is just something that breeds mistrust. And so one of the cases I make in this book is just tell us the truth. I think in the short run, a government may find it to be in its advantage to hide the ball. In the long run, it's never the right answer. The way you actually build trust is tell people the truth, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. And I do think that that's something that not only the United States, other governments too, but the United States government has a lot of room for improvement and a track record that's been imperfect. But I'm also not somebody who looks to the past and flogs ourselves for being imperfect, but to say how can we be better in the future and learn from those mistakes of the past. And that's the spirit I try to channel in this book.
Thank you very much, Vivek Ramaswamy. It was a pleasure having you on Frankly Speaking, and a message for all Indians for who you are the poster boy back home, a message for the Indians.
Well, look, I spent a lot of my youth summers in southern India, and that was an important part of shaping who I am, and I'm proud of that heritage. I want to save this country, my country, the United States of America. And I'm wishing the best for India as well. Revive that pride in both of our countries, maybe even a stronger relationship, and I think that's going to be good for all of us.
And good vibes and good wishes coming to you, and hopefully we'll root for you in the 2028 presidential elections.
We'll see what the future holds in store, but thank you, and I'm confident at some point in the next couple of years we'll make a visit to India, and then I hope it's productive.
Well, we'll look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.